Sparring is tricky business. You've got another human being in front of you with the sole intention of punching and kicking you in the vulnerable parts of your body. On top of that, you're probably tired, your body's aching, you're sweating, your heart is pumping out of your chest. There's an awful lot going on, and it's understandable why you might start feeling a little emotional. And all of this isn't even taking into consideration the fact that there might be stuff going on outside of the gym that's just basically pouring out when you find yourself getting into this pent-up emotional state. With all of that in mind, it's understandable that sometimes emotions get the better of us during sparring, but what's interesting to note, and what I've noticed especially amongst the people I've trained with, is when this does happen, they tend to be full with regret afterwards, wishing that they'd handled the situation better. So today I want to talk a little bit about how to be less emotional during sparring. Now, an important note before we even get into this, what I'm not saying is that emotions are bad. What I don't want to teach you to do is to push all of your emotions down and not feel anything. The last thing you want to do is be a feelingless robot that doesn't feel any empathy or sympathy towards your fellow man and doesn't allow yourself to feel anything at any given time. Really, the main takeaway I want you to get from this video is that during sparring, I want you to make sure that it's your rational human brain that's in charge and not your emotional monkey brain. Let's start by identifying exactly why this happens to you, or if you're a coach, why this might be happening to some of your students. One of my first book recommendations for all fighters is The Chimp Paradox. The Chimp Paradox is a book that basically discusses this idea that our brain is split into two parts, the rational human and the emotional chimp. Now, the rational human is you. It makes decisions based off of reasoning and logic. The chimp is a part of you, but it's not you. It's not who you are defined by, and it works off of instinct and emotions. Now, in this book, an example is given of where the chimp tends to naturally take over our minds, and this comes in the form of our fight, flight, or freeze response. Now, regardless of any martial art training, this is something that you're probably familiar with. If you get scared, if something comes up that appears to be a threat, you'll feel a huge surge, a rush of adrenaline, and then your mind will very quickly make a decision about whether you're going to stand and fight, whether you're going to run away, flight, or if you're simply going to freeze in the hope that, let's say it's a predator, that it's just going to walk past you. Now, in the more primitive days of man, and certainly in the other animal kingdoms, it's a very useful, very powerful response that helps protect us in times of crisis. If you're walking through a jungle and you suddenly come across a predator, this decision as to whether or not you're going to try and fight it, run from it, or simply freeze might save your life. However, in our modern society, this instinct can often become more of a hindrance, especially because it overrides the rational human. And it's this very response that's often responsible for you getting overly emotional during sparring. Your rational human understands that sparring is, relatively speaking, safe, that you've got the necessary protective equipment on, that you're operating within a set amount of rules, and that your sparring partner doesn't have any malice towards you. They don't have bad intentions, they're just playing the game. But the chimp part of you is very powerful and can quickly override this. The chimp just sees an attacker and it responds off of its instincts, that fight, flight, or freeze, and off of its emotions. Now, the emotions that are going to present themselves when you're presented with an attacker are going to be things like anger, you're angry that you're being attacked, sadness, you're not happy about it, fear, you've got that sense of fear coming up in you, and these are the emotions, the negative emotions that we don't want to be experiencing during sparring. Some of these automated responses are a good thing, like the raise of adrenaline within our body is there for a reason. It helps to minimize our sensation of pain, and it helps us to go longer, last longer in the fight, and even more than that, it can actually increase your speed and power output. The issue with the superpower of adrenaline is that it comes at a cost to your nervous system. Once you've had this huge spike of adrenaline in your system, your body tends to crash. You're going to need some recovery time afterwards, and if this happens early on in a sparring session, your adrenaline spikes up, you get all worked up. Before you know it, you're gassing out really quickly. And that feeling of being exhausted and tiring in sparring can also cause you to feel more fear, more nervousness, more anxiety, and then the cycle continues. So with that in mind, what can we do to ensure that it's our rational human that's present during the sparring sessions and not our emotional chimp? Well, the main thing that I found that worked for me when I was dealing with this personally, and the thing that I offer out to a lot of my younger students to help them get past this, is to sit down prior to sparring, completely separate from training, and ideally with a pad and paper or keyboard, somewhere to write it down. Write down all of the things that your rational human understands about sparring. What we spoke about earlier, that you've got protective equipment on that's going to keep you safe, that we operate within a set amount of rules, we're not gouging each other's eyes out, we're not trying to rip each other's hearts out of each other's chests, that the techniques are permitted within the rule set of, and write this down, the game that we're playing. At the end of the day, it's sport. Sparring should be sport combat, and it should be something that you do the same way that you would play a game of football. You can be competitive, you can be hungry, you can be eager, but it's not coming from an emotional place of anger or fear. In the chimp paradox, this is known as reassuring the chimp. What you're doing is you're speaking to the chimp within you. You're not ignoring the fact that they feel the way they feel, but you're reassuring them that their presence at this time is not necessary, that this is not a life or death situation, and they don't need that emotional response. The rational human has it under control. I'll emphasize the point about writing it down because the brain seems to process information a lot better when we process it in multiple ways. So it's one thing to just say something to yourself, but you're kind of double affirming it if you're also writing it down. The writing down process gets processed in a different area of your brain to you talking about it or listening to it. So if we're putting it in multiple places, we're writing it, we're reading it, we're saying it, we're thinking it, it helps to ingrain it in our mind. So when that stressful situation presents itself, when sparring day comes around, this stuff is more ingrained in your system and you're less likely to have that emotional chimp response. This isn't going to be an overnight transformation, by the way. It's not that you're going to sit there, do a little bit of journaling and then put your pads on and suddenly you don't feel anything. Like anything else, it's going to be a gradual process, but identifying and recognizing it is a huge step in that process to get you away from it. Given enough time, your chimp will learn and understand that its presence isn't necessary during sparring, and your rational human will be able to take the wheel. Some great side effects of this is you're going to be able to fight smarter. You're going to have more of your faculties present during sparring, and because you're going to be able to control those adrenaline spikes better, it means you're not going to tire as quickly. You're not going to burn through all your gas in the first few minutes and then be done for the rest of the session. Now, that's the main point I wanted to get across to you guys. I think if you do that, you're going to see a huge improvement in the way you spar and how your emotions get involved. But here's a few quick tips and tricks, or just some things to think about that I think will also help you out at the same time. Number one, certain people are just going to be triggers for you. Maybe you don't like their attitude. Maybe you don't like the way they are during the time you spend with them in the gym. Perhaps they're just a bad sparring partner. They're hitting too hard. I've done a whole video on dealing with bad sparring partners, so I'll link that in the description box below and in the cards up at the above if I remember. Just hit me in the comments if I don't and I'll link it for you. But learn to deal with bad sparring partners and understand who are the triggers for you. Maybe you need to avoid them for a few rounds. Maybe you need to have a discussion with them. Maybe you need to talk to your coach. 2, start priming yourself for sparring. Have a set process that you go through in the run up to sparring to prepare your mind and body for what's coming. Put your pads on in a very particular order. Have a very specific warm up that you do that goes through specific steps. Eventually, your mind will make the connection between these physical acts and what's going to come within the sparring. Then it's going to be less of a shock when you take that first punch to the face because your mind and your body is already primed for what's coming. And 3, if in the process of all of this, you're doing a sparring session and you start getting emotional, you feel like you're going to cry or you're going to lash out, you're going to get angry, that's the point where you need to stop. The mistake that people make is they try to power through. They try to get past that moment. The problem is once you're on that emotional track, once you start getting upset, angry, anxious, if you keep doing the action that's made you feel that way, you're only going to continue to fuel that fire. You're not going to stop it. Now, if you pause at that moment, if you catch it early, you can stop, take a round out, take a breather, get yourself emotionally under control, reassure the chimp, and then go back in as the human. What's happening in that moment is the chimp is starting to take over. And by continuing to do what the chimp has reared up, because the chimp is now paying attention to what's going on, if you continue to do what's made the chimp take notice, you're going to give them control. You are going to get upset, you're going to get angry, or you're going to get anxious. So if you want to avoid that, stop in that moment, take a break, take a round out, take your coach and just tell him, I just need a minute, and then jump back in as the rational human in control making those decisions. Guys, I hope this video has been helpful. If it has, I'd appreciate if you hit that like button, subscribe to subscribe to the channel. We've got new videos coming every week, and I will see you on the next one.